Tick, tick. The disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president now a mere 72 hours away from the deadline to pony up a nearly $500 million bond for the civil fraud judgment in the case brought by New York AG Tish James. If he comes up short, it could mean potentially parting ways with one of his crown jewels, one of the estates or golf courses or luxury buildings that Trump uses to puff up his image as a real estate mogul. Properties valued by appraisers in the civil fraud trial to be worth a fraction of what the Trump org claims they're worth. And with his Republican billionaire buddies so far at least not stepping up, with reports that the disgraced twice impeached ex-president doesn't like the optics of declaring bankruptcy. And after a brutal week of coverage about Donald Trump's finances or lack thereof, today Trump seemingly out of nowhere claimed to have almost $500 million in cash just laying around, money he failed to mention until now. A claim that, if it is to be believed, directly undercuts his own lawyers who have said in legal filings that Trump does not have enough cash on hand to satisfy that $500 million judgment against him. And now, in a new interview, Donald Trump is upping the ante yet again, this time claiming he will fight Judge Engoron's ruling, quote, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. Trouble is, bravado and bluster may not help Trump wiggle out of the deadline that's closing in on him right now. Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman. Plus, with me at the table, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig and host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC and president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton. Harry, Donald Trump seems to be walking back this idea already that he would spend some of his $500 million in cash on this, saying, quote, that doesn't mean I'm going to a rogue and incompetent judge, by which he, of course, means Judge Engoron. And he also said, quote, they can't take away your property because you've had a chance before you've had a chance to appeal. What is it that he is talking about here, Harry?
He just means he can try to fight it legally, but guess what? It is not up to him. If the judgment was entered 30 days ago, Tish James automatically has a piece of paper that empowers her to go after his properties unless a court somehow enters an order before Monday. That's just the way it is. So it's really, for all his bravado, not going to be his call. I do think, though, that it redoubles his resolve to do anything rather than let Tish James, put the metaphoric lock on 40 Wall Street. And that's something we need to be concerned about, because there are possible scenarios where a billionaire here or there steps up. We now know that he's trying to make that happen in the Truth Social IPO, but billionaires don't step up for free, and it would result in a situation where a possible president is deeply beholden to someone who has gotten him out of the most perilous hot water. So that's something to watch, because I think he's going to do anything short of letting Tish James just have her choice of the crown jewels.
Reverend Sharpton, the point about Tish James that Harry makes, it has so many layers. Tease it apart for us, the idea that it would be Tish James who get to choose which building.
Well, the fact that he would be facing a woman prosecutor, a black woman prosecutor, and one who had already debunked the whole Trump University. I mean, there's a lot of emotions that he has, none good, about Tish James. And I think that it will drive him to try to do anything he can, including, I can't say sell his principles, because I'm not one that believes he has many, but he will do anything he can to try to do whatever he can to block this on Monday. And he also wants to be dramatic. He'd love to look like he's pulling a rabbit out of his hat. He's the showman. But I think that he is going to find that the rules in court and the rules of law doesn't play along with his scenario. This is not a reality show. This is reality. And I think that even if he comes up with the money, he's going to do it at such an expense to what's left of his business and the campaign and the Republican Party that either way it'll be devastating. And I think that Tish James only makes it even worse for him because of his whole feelings about women in general, black women in particular.
Sue, he's still searching for that rabbit that he's going to pull out of the hat. Walk me through the different ways this could play out.
Right. I think he has turned this into a reality show. That was really well said, but it is reality. And we don't know if he's come up already with the $500 million and he just plans to post it on Monday and drag this drama out for the whole weekend. But what he's facing is real if he doesn't come up with it. And there's just questions. There's not only potential, asset seizures that could take place. He's got some cash and his bank accounts could be frozen, and he may be dealing with a situation where he can't meet payroll, he can't meet the interest payments on his debt, and he can't pay his vendors. So I think...
And then what happens?
That's what we're going to see, but it's, I think we're going to be writing a version of an obituary of the Trump organization if she goes that route and she starts to freeze cash. This is all new territory, so we don't know, but it just sort of seems to reason if somebody's going to start a seizure process, they're going to grab the most liquid thing, which is the cash. This is why the surety companies that he went to put up the bond wanted cash for the same reason. Cash is king. It's a saying for a reason. Everybody would prefer cash over hard assets, especially some of the assets that he has. Office towers, it's not a great time for that market. And I can go down the road. Golf courses, the same thing. They're harder to sell, and you start to run into those problems. And Tish James isn't in that business. So I think that's what he's facing Monday. But you also see today he's teasing out that he has the money. Or he's almost got it. Mm-hmm. They went to the court on Monday and said that they didn't. We don't know what happened between Monday and Friday that changed that. But I think over time we're going to get some clarity. I think this weekend is going to be significant. And there's also still a chance that the appeals court could weigh in. They're not obligated to, but something could happen there. It's late in the day on Friday now, but even Monday. That's just something to watch. It sort of seems less likely as we go on that's going to happen.
I just want to say a big wow. I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought there, but the possibility that, as you said, you would be writing the obituary of the Trump organization is meaningful, both as it relates to the Trump organization and as it relates then to the Trump political brand, given how intimately they are connected.
Right, and we don't know.
Right.
I mean, but if she goes that route and if they can't start meeting payroll, it's going to be, that's not good for any company.